Give us any chance, we'll take it. Read us any rule, we'll break it. We're gonna make our dreams come true.
Welcome back to Night After Night, the podcast where two nerds talk about Laverne and Shirley. I'm Chris Jayawardena, hello. And here we go again with another Top 5 Episodes list. After the sudden explosion of creativity and boldness of Season 2, I found Season 3 to be a really interesting mix. What was new becomes standard, but there's also a focus on solidifying character development of all the major players. The relationship between side characters Frank and Edna intensifies, Shirley and Carmine are basically back together, Laverne's adventurous libido takes off, and both Lenny and Squiggy have some admirably romantic times. It also saw the beginning of a single director doing most of the episodes, with Alan Rafkin doing all but 2 of them this season. Rafkin, to me, will always be the loud, older man interviewed toward the end of his life by PopEntertainment.com, whose book Cue the Bunny on the Rainbow is something I still need to acquire as of this recording. But what he brought to Laverne and Shirley was a better emphasis on directing. The staging gets better and more theatrical, the punchlines get tighter, with occasional camera movements that really ramp up the energy. It would personify the series from this point onward. But to me, what I found interesting is how difficult it was to lock in a top 5. While the top 3 were really obvious choices, the rest of the bunch was an interesting grab bag. Sometimes I found episodes to be good in places but leaving me feeling kind of empty, such as with the stakeout and bus stop, and other times the episodes were just shy of great. Even ones I felt were shoo-ins kept needing to be reevaluated. So maybe this is a top 3 with a wobbly 4 and 5 slot. That said, Season 3 of Laverne and Shirley is consistently good in my opinion. It is sometimes fantastic, and though there's an episode or two I maybe drop completely, the whole thing is worth watching.
Oh, Carmine, there's another way. Yeah, we can think of a plan.
Look, forget about your plans. I'm sick and tired of your plans.
I know what let's do. I know what. Let's all do what we used to do when we were kids and we were upset. Let's go out and stop the ice cream man and get 3 Eskimo pies.
What?
Yeah, you remember. I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream.
Look, we're not kids anymore, huh? Ice cream is not going to solve any problems.
It's a common joke on the podcast that I don't like Carmine Ragusa. Shirley's sort of boyfriend is sometimes a complete chode, and sometimes he's a heck of a guy. But he's so inconsistently written that it frustrates me often. Much as I could blame the character, it really is more that the writers failed Carmine. Whatever the case, I hated him for 2 whole seasons, for the most part. Then, this episode hit and changed everything. The idea that Carmine is a guy down on his luck trying to make it is the kind of 70s melodrama that I love. It finally gives him something consistent to hold on to, instead of just being a fella who can supply plot convenience and dance once in a while. While I'd prefer he finally just go the route of being an actual criminal or mobster, and that's probably the crime movie fan in me. I mean, hey, what's to say that Mr. Big doesn't like getting impersonated? What's to say the FBI didn't have a good reason to try to flip him into an informant? Perhaps he's even secretly been an enforcer for the Knapp Street Mafia this entire time. Anyway, dance studio, right. The whole plan to help Carmine get this business is another example of one of the show's best tropes. The gang bands together against an obstacle. And this episode is definitely one of the sweeter uses of that trope. While the fake wife scene is cringy as hell for me, it's a testament to the girls' dedication that they throw themselves entirely into the act. And when the girls find out Carmine's decided to deal with a lone shark and not a lone guppy, they intervene and meddle out of concern for his well-being. The dance studio scene itself with Nathan the Greek is also an absolute treat. The girls put on a great number, and that they get the boys to do the hula hula with them in the process is just good enough. But then them getting to perform it for Meat from Phantom of the Paradise, just icing on the cake. That it all culminates in a heartfelt dance number from Eddie, showing his chops in an incredible, almost uninterrupted shot, is the big highlight of the entire episode. And you can call me sappy, but the friggin' Edna ex machina works for me. By the end of this episode, I wanted Carmine to win, which means he won me over. For now. We'll get back to that next season.
All right, you women! You're in for some rough stuff tonight. No, you're not.
You
no
have
rough
never
stuff,
seen
no
before.
rough
We are
stuff.
going to take these 2 women and we are going to slap them silly.
No, we're
and
not.
then,
No, we're
after
not.
that, we are going to give them each a pink belly, the biggest
No
pink belly
pink
they have
belly,
ever
no
had.
pink belly.
This slot on the list was easily the hardest for me to figure out. Airport 59 and its high-flying Packers shenanigans, the slow child and the heartfelt but technical issue-laden little love story, Meet Fabian just for having Rosie in it, and you know, I'll still consider this a flex spot. Maybe it's all of them, maybe it's none of them, maybe it's Maybelline. Tag team wrestling, on the other hand, is still a heck of a lot of fun. With a cast of lovable side characters, a cameo by Penny's daughter Tracy, Carmine boxing with Squiggy, and the big tag team wrestling match itself, this episode delighted me. It's a great communal episode, with an external foe that adds to the conflict while remaining really fun. There can be a lot of intensity in this series as conflict sometimes. Once in a while, it's great to just relax and spend time with your friends. In some respects, I would almost liken this to like the beach episode you sometimes find in anime and some other cartoons. So this kind of is in that sort of vein. Heck, that's why we say Lenny Kosnowski is a wife guy without a wife in our little fandom circle for the show. It also features one of the chameleonic guest actors for the show. Lynn Marie Stewart shows up in 7 different episodes of Laverne and Shirley, playing almost entirely different characters each time. And it actually took me like 4 viewings to catch that she was even in this one. And hey, there's Judy Askins as Terry Buttafuoco. Tag yourself into this wonder, why don't you?
Remember that day the brakes went out and the truck got rolling? We were doing about 90 miles an hour?
Yeah, we couldn't get nothing in on the radio either.
Yeah. Well, you brought that thing around Dead Man's Curve, narrowly missing that schoolhouse. You put the truck in a spin, double clutched it at 360 and brought it to a halt right in front of that burger stand.
Boy, was I hungry.
Jokes about anachronistic Godzilla movie posters aside, it's really special when you get an episode like this. A long time ago, I remember hearing that Idiocracy was a smart movie about dumb people. While a bit judgy when applied to the character of Andrew Squigman, you were able to see David Lander really perform smartly as a dumb character. He clearly makes decisions, as the term usually goes, about the way the character is reacting to the situation or being presented with something. While not credited as writer, I honestly would not be surprised if he had a lot to say about this one in the script and rehearsal phase. This is a great showcase episode for him that takes a simple kids show setup and gives it a maturity I was really surprised by. It also has wonderfully vaudevillian theatrics, with the living room demonstration of proper driving techniques being a particular highlight. That Rafkin stages it in a single camera shot is something I'm curious as to whether it was a decision made in editing or by one of the producers. Typically sitcoms are thought of as just shows, and somehow that weakens them, or at least the way that they execute them. But how you visualize something matters, and they made it count here. You set up the joke, build a suspense, and pay it off all in one shot. That's class right there. As my lovely co-host Lisa said, episodes like these take side characters from the cast and put them center stage, and like Dan's studio, this one shines best when it allows the writing and acting to just go for it, instead of pigeonholing an awkward joke. Be it the comedy of Squiggy driving Laverne and Shirley insane with rage during the studying scenes, or the romantic pep talk from Lenny in the third act, what puts this episode on the list for me is emotional honesty. In some ways, I'd almost call this High Neighbor Book 3, as the girls have gone from tolerating the boys to befriending the boys to helping the boys. While to my knowledge it doesn't go past this point as of season 5, the driving test is a sweet landmark moment, and one I'm so glad happened before, well, season 4. We'll get there.
There's been a problem. Shirley Feeney is...
What's the matter?
Well, I'm afraid she's gone. Gone? She's gone? She's gone! She's gone!
Oh, I did it again. I didn't mean passed away gone. I meant disappeared gone. Sorry.
Placing this episode so high feels a tad odd, but for me it is a very in-character episode, with particular highlights that I keep coming back to. Where an episode like Tag Team Wrestling feels like a fun weekend party, and Driving Test is a heartfelt dilemma, here we have a story of Shirley's life being in danger. It's full of squishy empathy, supportive friendship, and health anxieties galore. Relatable, Cheryl. As a Shirley Feeney showcase, what this episode does amazingly well is show the effects of Shirley's parents on her behavior, both her fears and how she looks at the world. You don't see Jack or Barb, aka Lily, in this episode, but their presence is absolutely felt in the terror that Shirley's overwhelmed by. On the podcast, one thing I keep coming back to is that Shirley's childhood is tragic. She was a kid who was essentially abandoned by her loving but manipulative father, and whose goals were shaped by a chronically controlling mother. Her family told her stories to scare her, put her on the defensive, and essentially control her into thinking, believing, and obeying. This comes up multiple times, often as a joke, but here we see potentially life-threatening results of it. But what brings this to the screen more than anything is Cindy Williams' performances across the series timeline. As a member of the New Hollywood, including some wild roles and an important part in The Conversation by Francis Coppola, Williams clearly had chops. Laverne and Shirley gets a lot of dismissive remarks from being a slapstick sitcom, but there's often a lot working under the hood here. Shirley's operation, with its costume wildness, is easy to get caught up in, but there's some really strong acting going on that's worth paying attention to. At its core, Shirley's operation is about Laverne rescuing her best friend and bringing out the best from Lenny and Squeaky in the process. But the moment that absolutely puts this into my list is Frank's worried handholding as he comforts Shirley in her time of need. When he says, "Call me Pop," it got me choked up the first few times watching this episode for the podcast. And there's something so human and loving about it. Shirley, who had a father that was never there for her, and a mother who manipulated her into oblivion, being essentially told that I love you and care about you and worry about you, is one of the most meaningful moments of the series. There's also something delightfully surreal about the cast doing this story while dressed up for an Alice in Wonderland production, because as someone who's had to do the emergency run throughout childhood, it felt kind of fitting. And while I do absolutely agree with Lisa that this absolutely desperately needed a scene of Carmine trying to comfort his girlfriend, or at least something that explained he had shenanigans going off screen that explains why he can't be there, I say this just goes further into the Ragusa crime family theory. Boy had responsibilities to the Godfather on this one. In the end, Shirley's operation is a dramatic victory on the part of David W. Duclos, whose writing talents often leaned into the heavier side for the series, and of director Rafkin keeping the pace going and the whole cast performances across the board. They took a premise that could have been disgustingly forced, but added the right amount of sweetness, realism, honesty, and that hint of sarcasm that makes it one of my absolute favorites of the season.
Uncle Elliot said it was from a magician's suit.
A magician?
Yeah.
Oh, put it away then. Put it away. Put it back in the pocket. Put it away.
I hope you're not afraid of the dark, Bertie.
Put it in there. Is it in there?
Yeah.
One special trait that Laverne and Shirley has over a lot of other sitcoms of its time and its ilk is this. It's just that little bit magical. The misadventures of Laverne and Shirley sometimes find themselves in dream logic, from the art direction to the stylized plots. It really makes it stand out in my mind. Debutante Ball, my favorite of the third season, is a perfect example of it. While initially an obvious gag that, of all people, Lenny Kosnowski would turn out to be descended from a noble bloodline, the execution of the storyline is a romantic fairy tale. It brings the right amount of hijinks, adventure, and emotion to take a silly idea into a delightful escape. Like Honeymoon Hotel before it, it becomes an episode about victory, albeit with more struggles to overcome. More than that, it's about besting the bougie bastards by the strength of your character, not your bloodline. As Lisa mentioned in her top 5 list, the strength of the girls' friendship here is a powerful force. Shirley is both best friend and fairy godmother in this episode, supportive of Laverne taking the offer and then rescuing her in the nick of time. Hearing Shirley, the dreamer who has to control everything, discard her usual facade for the sake of her best friend is one of the most lovely gestures the show's ever done. And the tenacity with which he makes her escape through the metal-barred window, despite becoming a mummy in a cardboard tomb, is the go-getter attitude of Shirley Wilhelmina Feeney being put to good use. Also on display, Lenny's sweetness in this episode is great, and the playful charm between him and Laverne is an incredible relief to see. As we pointed out last season, it was clear that the two had found this kind of good pal dynamic by High Neighbor Book 2, with an almost conspiratorial spirit between them. It's similarly seen as they walk the ballroom, clinking glasses together and helping each other at every turn. They're both the outsiders in this situation. A lesser show, in my opinion, would have had them arguing or jealous. Putting them on the same side against the snobs and the accidental slapstick, I think works fantastically. And when it comes to Laverne DeFazio, the belle of the ball, there's a lot to say. From the floopy dress to the cumbersome umbrella, there's a lot of gags that Penny gets to do here, including the big tumble that sees her covered in fruit punch. I said earlier about rooting for Carmine, and when it comes to the show normally, I root for the girls pretty much every episode, be it for Shirley to get out of her mother's programming or Laverne to realize she deserves way better from both her life and the men in it. Here, Laverne is our Cinderella, and that she gets an arc of crisis before victory gives Penny ample opportunity to capture the heartbreak and poignant triumph. There's a lot of great Laverne stuff in Season 3, from little jokes to big emotional beats. While arguably they're stronger elsewhere in the year, this episode was one of the peaks. Most of all, for me, I appreciate the magic. This show combined a screwball comedy charm with kitchen sink melodrama often, but when a little fairy tale dust lands on the series, it leads to wonderful episodes like this one. The third season of Laverne and Shirley is something of a treasure in the series for me. While I find Season 2 to almost be the end-all be-all, and Season 5 so far has blown me away, the consistency of quality and depth that it hits brings the show into a new light. Some truly wonderful stuff is made here, and it's something I look forward to revisiting as we continue covering the next 5 seasons. From the close-up in obstacle course to the long-taken driving test to the hijinks of the cruise, it's a bit of a rush and a bit of a blast. With that, thank you again so much for watching, everyone, as we continue our coverage of Laverne and Shirley here on Night After Night. Be sure to check out my co-host's top 5 video linked at the end of this video, and if you like what we do, consider subscribing or taking a gander at our Patreon. We have perks. Till next time, folks, splash a drink in a rich snob's face, and remember that it's a best friend move to split a tissue.